Welcome to our panel. Today we are excited to present our Lessons in Leadership, How Behavior Spreads, with our esteemed panelist, AnnMarie Schultz, CEO of CORA Services, and Kate Sheilds, CEO of Vault Communications. AnnMarie was named CEO in July 2015 after serving as Chief Operations Officer. Her visionary leadership and strong management have expanded services to thousands of more children throughout the region. Key accomplishments include expanding related services to over 50,000 additional non-public and charter schools, securing a contract to provide early intervention services, and opening the Early Years program at LaSalle University. Kate is the CEO of Vault Communications, one of the fastest growing marketing communication firms in the U.S., as recognized by Inc. magazine, the Philadelphia Business Journal, and the Philadelphia 100. For more than 2 decades, C-level executives from diverse industry sectors have entrusted Kate to counsel them in strategic communication planning, crisis communications, corporate social responsibility, media relations, digital emerging media, and so much more. Kate brings a valuable client-side perspective to her work, having held a communication roles in-house at Campbell's Soup Company and at Aramark. I'm honored to present 2 inspiring and thoughtful leaders who will offer insight and advice for all professionals at any level. We are all leaders. Please welcome AnnMarie and Kate. Kate, AnnMarie, I am so excited that you both have agreed to participate with our 4th annual Women in Business online conference this year and to talk about leadership, lessons in leadership and how behavior spreads. You're both leaders in your industry and dynamic women, and I'm very grateful that you have agreed to participate and be part of this program. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
So I have a couple of questions that need to ask you, because it's really important to, when you're talking about leadership, is to really understand the journey on how you got to where you are. So every great leader has a journey, and they all have a story. So why don't we each of you talk briefly about your story and how it led you to where you are today in 2020. So AnnMarie, I'm going to start with you, please.
That's great. Thanks for having us. I already said that, but I love talking about leadership. I love talking about how fluid it is and how it's not rocket science, right? So to get into your question, there's a story. I had no idea that I would end up in leadership when I first started off in my world of work. And at the age of, I think, 24, I was asked to take on a role as a leader running a program for teen parents across the city of Philadelphia. And I was the manager. I became the manager for that program. Actually, I became the coordinator for that program. But we had over 45 staff, and it was over a $5 million budget that I suddenly became responsible for. And I didn't know the extent of what this job would be, but it was everything from interviewing staff, hiring staff, being the main liaison with the state, going in and out of these schools. We were in 22 high schools working with teen parents and supporting the staff with just their data entry and their programming and their services. And it just suddenly became this major job. And I had no idea what I was walking into at the age of 24. And that really began my journey. I mean, a lot of it was somebody else identifying in me the skills that I did not know I had, and beginning to pull them out. And it started at a really young age. So when I left that particular position, I didn't actually want to be a leader. I wasn't necessarily interested. I applied to be a camp counselor for CORA. CORA Services is where I work. It's where I'm the CEO of now. And I just wanted to work with kids. I just wanted to run around with them. I wanted to get dirty with them. And immediately in my interview, again, leadership at CORA just saw something in me that I didn't even know I had, because I was at that point really only 26 or 27. And they saw what I was doing, and they called me to a different position within the organization. And then on day 1, not only did I get called to a different position, but on day 2, they asked me to become the director of a brand new community center. And so that really opened up my journey with the organization I'm at now, and got to start up and launch this new community center with working with families, working with funders, working with kids, and just being able to bring all these skills to the table and people to the table. So much about leadership is just bringing the right people to the table. And so I learned how to do that well and get people excited about new ideas and new visions. And in that process just grew as a leader, which then got me involved in starting up new initiatives at CORA at large, and really looking at the agency at large and seeing what we do well and understanding what we could be doing with what we do really well, and looking for opportunities or new openings, new growth, new openings, new possibilities, just taking what we do well and expanding it into new areas. And I think that that's just my journey in 25 plus years of really other people seeing something in me that I didn't know I had at a really, really young age, and then cultivating that and allowing me to flourish as a leader to get to the point where I'm at today. And I know you'll ask later what's a huge thing and that's important for leaders, and it's just recognizing, like people did in me, that skill, and then bringing it out in them. So that is my story and my journey to where I am today.
It's a great story. It is. Kate, you also have an interesting story.
I do, and it has a little bit of a connection to the Northeast. So my story is that, and I guess my overall theme is that treat every opportunity and job like the audition that it is, even if it's an entry-level opportunity. We all know the story of the supermarket cashier who ends up being the supermarket CEO. Those stories, I still firmly believe, are very possible and happen every single day in this country. And I certainly had that experience myself. So my story is that I went to school for communications and PR. I was offered a job in a very small firm in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. I fancied myself a Madison Avenue person. I thought I should be in New York, but figured out pretty quickly that that's not fiscally possible when you're just starting out and the salaries were what they were. So I decided to come home to Philadelphia, where I was born and raised, and I was given an entry-level opportunity. And again, to AnnMarie's point, also it's not just finding people that will invest in you, but also listening to advice and good advice that you're given and counsel for what it is. And in this case, my dad, who did not work in the field at all, by the way, but he knew well enough to know that a small company means lean and mean. And it means that they're going to throw you into the fire maybe quicker than a larger company would, and a company with small entrepreneurial values. So he encouraged me to take this job at a small firm, which is what I did. And because of that, I was kind of thrown into the fire. And I had that really great opportunity to kind of prove myself, even as young as 23. And I loved the job, but I wanted to do that glitzy Madison Avenue stuff that I just referred to. Had some familial obligations in Philadelphia when I was kind of in my mid-20s. Knew I could not go back up to New York, this time for a different reason, not so much financial, but more familial. So I decided to leave that small little entrepreneurial environment where I got my first big chance and go to Campbell Soup. And then I went to Aramark, and I got all that stuff out of my system. And I think that's really important too, is, if you really want to try something and you really think it's kind of calling you, go try it. In my case, I fed that calling. I went, I figured out that I loved that type of work, but that, celebrities are just people. Just like everyone else, and what the sexy part of advertising maybe is not as sexy as you think. Got that out of my system, and when I was working at Campbell Soup, and then I got recruited to go work at Aramark, the very first boss I had at that small little entrepreneurial company came to me, and she said to me, and at this time my husband, we were expecting our first child. I was 29 years old. She said to me, "Hey, listen, I have an opportunity for you. I know you're about to have your first child. I'm sure you're thinking about your career and what that's going to look like. My partner is going to be retiring, and I would love for you to be my partner." And I was 29, and I loved the story because, I had a really fancy graduate school education, and I thought, I'm 29. I've been working in the field for 6 years. I really know a lot of stuff. I had no clue what she was asking me whatsoever. Which is another big thing I think leadership teaches us, is that, we're always learning and evolving and growing, and we're doing that for other people. So I got into the car and I said to my husband, well, she wants me to be her partner. And my husband, who grew up in the Northeast, and he took a trades path. He's an electrician. He went right from high school into the trades. He knew exactly what it meant, and he knew it meant money. And it was money that we certainly didn't have. We both came from humble upbringings in neighborhoods in Philly, me, Roxborough, he, Northeast Philly. We did not have family that we could rely on to help us make that investment. But what we did have was a duplex that we lived in the Northeast. And we actually decided to sell that and invest in this company. And we were unable to buy everything that was for sale at the time. It just was a very big stake in the company. But we bought small and we bought in together. And that was 15 years ago. So I am now the majority owner of the company. I earned my time and my stripes and had a chance to buy out other partners as I went along. But for me, if it wasn't for the opportunity I had been given on that very first entry-level job, that quite honestly, I poo-pooed. I thought, oh, I should be in Madison Avenue and I should be in New York. And here I am in a very small little agency in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. Once I got there, I realized, don't be silly. This is a big chance. This is a big audition. Prove yourself and do your best at this particular job. And the other thing I will say is that I never lose touch with people. And that has proven to be a really, really, really good strategy because you never know kind of where you're going to reconnect with those people down the road. I know some people say don't burn a bridge, but to me, that has a negative connotation. It's more just keep in touch with people, keep the pulse on where they are in their life and be a helper. Like always be willing to be a helper. And I have a lot of friends that are friends because of me. I connected them together, both professionally or personally. Be willing to be a connector, even if it means that you don't necessarily get to always be with that group of people. There's plenty of times where I've introduced two women who've kind of taken off a professional relationship and I might not be even invited to lunch that particular day. That's okay, because true gratitude doesn't have any expectation, right? So you do, and generosity, you choose to do that without any expectation. So again, because I kept in touch, that kind of came back to me. And that's really how I built my business. I kept in touch with all my Campbell Soup people, Aramark people, and our business is almost 95% referral at this point. It's people that have worked with us in the past, and I've passed that down to all the people that work for us. So again, just one opportunity that I had to hit a single and it ended up changing my life.
So you keep your village.
Definitely.
And full circle, but you bring back, when you come back to the full circle, you brought the experience of having the Campbell Soup and the Aramark experience that brought it back into where you are now. And
yeah,
AnnMarie, very similar to you.
Yeah, and I would say don't be afraid to go home. I think a lot of people say, oh, you can't go home again. You know, you can't go back from whence you came. For me, that weighed on my heart. I thought to myself, oh, I'm going to go back. I mean, I already left that chapter of my life behind. But I came back and I stayed. I've been here for 15 years. And I always tell people who leave, sometimes it's hard to say goodbye to people. I'm sure AnnMarie has that experience too. When a really good, talented person leaves your organization, our job as leaders is to make people better than they were before they met us. That's our job, period, end of story. And if they're feeling a yearning to go explore a different path, our job as leaders is to support them and to remind them that there's always a place they can come back to if they're interested. So I think it will be for some people, it won't be for all people, but there's no shame in going back to an organization or a home that you once had because you're not the same person that you were when you left.
That's true. Very true. So as leaders, we don't start off as leaders. AnnMarie, you started off in a very young age, which is wonderful. A lot of people don't have that opportunity to be able to excel at an early age or early in their career. But even so, everybody has a mentor or mentors. Who would you say was your mentor? You don't have to specifically mention a name if you choose not to, but who is your mentor and what leadership skill and quality did they have that helped you to learn and develop into the leader you are now? AnnMarie, I'm going to bounce back to you.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. There was somebody at CORA who actually was in our human resources department who I think the first thing is just really had people skills. You know, so much of being a good leader isn't about somebody's resume. It's about, first of all and foremost, knowing your own weaknesses and your own strengths really well, and then building a team around that that's going to get you to the greater whole. And then, Kate alluded to this, but I would also want to say even further that you're never intimidated by somebody being better than you at something. In fact, hire people who are going to be better than you at certain things. Hire people. There are times right now that I know that we're faced with a challenge with a funder or with a relationship, and I actually may not be the right person to go. I might, because they care about titles, but depending on what they care about or who they are and what motivates them, you need to know the right person to be there at the door, and you're right behind it. So you're never intimidated by somebody being stronger than you. And the individual who mentored me understood that. He was never intimidated of me, and was able to pull out my competencies. So I talk a lot about the difference between somebody's like resume or their job description versus the competencies that they bring to the table. And he really taught me, without using those words, actually we did use those words quite a bit, what is somebody's competencies? Because there's something about who people are that they're just naturally skilled in and naturally talented in that goes way beyond their job description or goes way beyond their resume. And he really taught me that skill by both showing it in me, as well as when we would talk about teams, we would have very limited dollars at times to build robust teams, especially when I was running a community center. We would have 4 full-time people, and we were serving hundreds of children a week. So I was relying on the core group of 4 to market the programs, to run the programs, to build new advisory councils, youth advisory councils, adult advisory councils, 4 full-time people doing all of this. And to build a team required the correct competencies within 4 key people. And so he and I would really talk a lot about that as we were trying to develop our core team to run that community center. And that community center actually became very well known in Philadelphia for the work that we were doing. We were highlighted even in a paper in Washington, D.C. for the work that we were doing at that particular school. And it was because of that. It was because we learned how to build teams, and that's what he would do. And he also, was one of those people that if I was like, down and out and it felt like we were not going to make it, and that we were really struggling and things were really rough, could just be that sounding board. We all need that sounding board to kind of give us that outside perspective on where we're at and what we're doing with wisdom. And so I think that those key elements he brought to the table, and he's probably a big reason that I'm now the CEO now, because I think that he recognized what the organization needed moving forward and helped to, I don't want to use the word manipulate, but maybe manipulate that at a higher leadership level to make sure that it became really aware to what the next leadership needed to be for the organization at large. So, I would give him my ultimate, stamp of approval for being the mentor for me throughout most of my career. And I'll even call him now, he's retired now, but I would even call him now for advice when things come up.
It's good to have somebody in your corner like that.
Yeah, it's great.
Kate, how about you?
I think, I've thought about this question quite a bit when I'm asked, and I will tell you, my answer is not traditional only because it kind of happened to me earlier in my life than my professional career. But the woman who was the president of my high school and principal of my high school was a huge mentor to me. And I went to a single-sex high school, so I think part of it was just that. I think I was kind of raised on girl power, which was a really lucky situation for myself to be in. This woman in particular just had amazing communication skills. And I want to make sure I distinguish it by saying not only to, let's say, the whole population of the high school, but also on an interpersonal level. And I've been talking about this a lot with my girls lately. I have 3 daughters, 2 who are teenagers and 1 who's a tween. And I keep telling them that it really doesn't matter what career they choose. Good communicators will always, always be in demand. To be really excellent at communication is a skill, and it's not a skill that a lot of people have for whatever reason. It just isn't. It could be comfort level, it could be training, it could be things in between, but communication can be very hard for people. This mentor was just an amazing orator. So when it was high stakes and she had to address the whole school, it was like listening to, a head of state. When it was interpersonal, she had the ability to have brave conversations, which I think is probably the hardest thing about leadership, that I don't think everyone has innate. You have to kind of learn it over time. Just the ability to have an unvarnished, brave, honest, candid conversation, knowing full well that even if it's a difficult conversation, long term, you want that person to look back on it and appreciate that honesty and that raw opportunity for truth, right? So she kind of taught me that early. And I know, at least with my organization, the most important thing I can do is constantly communicate and also understand that not everyone needs broad communication. Some people need a more one-on-one impersonal situation. And I think with COVID in particular, this has been really important because we're very isolated right now in terms of our situations. Everyone's handling it differently. And we're physically isolated, a lot of us are. And, it came down to me having to do one-on-one meetings with all of my employees this year because I understood that the communication could be broad, but really I needed to hear from each person, like, where are you on this? Like, on 0 to 10, what's your fear? On 0 to 10, what's your comfort level with coming back to the office? On 0 to 10, what's your worry level for your family or your friends? And they're all things that I learned from that mentor, just really understanding that you can't ever over communicate, and like you just can't. People want to be in the loop, and just to understand, it doesn't matter what field. The art of written communication and verbal communication is so needed, and will always be needed. And so few people are comfortable with it. So to me, that's what I learned from her.
Did you ever have a chance to tell her?
Yes. And maybe that's why she's still a mentor to me. I've been in touch with her. And again, because she always had that ability to have the big relationship and the small, intimate relationship. She was somebody that, she was one of the first phone calls I got when I lost my dad in my 20s. She took me out to lunch and checked on me. And through the years, I've kept in touch with her. It hasn't necessarily been as, frequent as it would have been when I was younger. But again, that networking, never lose touch thing, she was recently brought back to that school as an interim president when the existing president died suddenly of the high school. So she was brought back as an interim, and I was the first person there to help her with some of the communications needs that we had. So in recent years, in the past 2 years, we've kind of been really connecting and seeing each other so much. And we had a really good laugh about, like, who would have known back then that we would be in that situation today. But that's another, life lesson that you're kind of put where you're supposed to be, and it all will make sense eventually.
Do you want to by chance mention what the school is?
Oh, sure. It's Mount St. Joseph Academy.
Okay, because it's going to be a Philadelphia market mostly, but you never know.
We have plenty of Northeast girls that went to the Mount with me. And many of us, were given opportunities to go there. I never would have went there if it wasn't for a nice little music scholarship. And I'm very grateful for it. And I give as much as I can to that school because of what they gave to me. But we have a lot of Northeast Philly alums. The biggest star we have is Jen Carroll, who grew up in Somerton and was the star of Top Chef. Yep. Northeast Philadelphia, born and raised, still from Somerton.
That's great. Excellent. Great representation. So when we're talking about mentors, and mentor question is asked a lot. I'm sure both of you have been asked that question because you were very quick to be able to respond because you've given it some thought on who your positive mentor has been throughout your career. Has there been a negative mentor? Maybe not necessarily a mentor, but something, and we are not going to mention anybody's name, but has there been anything in your career that you've watched in a behavior or in a culture or just a skill set that you thought, I can learn as much from this negative as I could from a positive? Were you ever in that scenario where you had something? Kate, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I always say this to people especially young 20-something college students, there's no such thing as a bad internship. And I always say that because I had a couple dreadful ones. And I think the dreadful ones teach you just as much, if not more, about you and your kind of goals than the good ones do, right? Because a bad internship will allow you to see a couple of things. Maybe it's the work at hand that you really don't like. Well, that's a win, because you learn right away that that's not what you're meant to do. But bad behavior is another thing, right? If you have a bad internship where you have a bad manager or bad behavior, you're learning. You're taking that in and realizing, okay, when I become a leader, when I'm put in a position, I will never do X, Y, and Z. I had an internship when I was in college, and I had a woman treat me like a lot of people, unfortunately, still to this day, treat interns. So it was, go get my dry cleaning, it's a lot of personal errands, a lot of just the tone of speech and the way I was spoken to, as if I wasn't a human being. And that I was just there to serve the personal needs of that person. And I still watch that happen in all the time today. People take tone and people assign jobs to people that really aren't appropriate and should be done on a personal level or through a TaskRabbit or the million apps that we have nowadays for those types of things where people are signing up to do those tasks. I also would say that I also watched a lot of men in particular talk, obviously aggressively about women behind the scenes, or inappropriately, or just not include a woman in a conversation, not even realizing what they were saying out loud. So I feel like I've watched a lot of bad behavior, but I will also tell you candidly, I don't know if AnnMarie would say the same. I've exhibited bad behavior myself. I've made mistakes too. And I look back on those moments and I'm like, ooh, that was bad. I think the key though is, number one, figuring it out as soon as possible. Hopefully on your own, but if it's brought to your attention, making sure it's rectified, owning it, authentically apologizing for it. There have been a couple times in my career when I look back, I can trace it to when my kids were really young, and maybe I was just a little bit mentally stressed, where maybe my patience level wasn't where it needed to be with somebody. And I don't even necessarily mean in a verbal conversation, but just in general, maybe I didn't have the time I should have had to mentor that person better and teach them. And maybe I just was a little impatient. I think I've been guilty of that in the past. And I think sometimes when you're busy and you're a CEO and you're balancing a lot of hats, you can appear to be dismissive. If you're not able to give people a lot of your time. And I think earlier in my career, when I was really overwhelmed with young children and running a company, I definitely could have been fairly accused of that. So I think that I'm certain that there probably hopefully would be more people that say they learned great behaviors from me. But I think we're all guilty along our journey of making mistakes. The biggest thing is acknowledging them, apologizing for them, and being a better version of who you are.
Yeah, humility. I mean, you're basically mentioning humility, Kate. One of the things that I think is so important for a leader to have is humility, because at the end of the day, we're only as good as our team. We're only as good as the people underneath us. And we should never think for even a second that we are the best at anything or that we don't make mistakes, right? It's being real. It's really being real. And Kate, you're mentioning, I wasn't going to bring up, my situation didn't have to do necessarily with humility, but you're bringing up an issue that I think is really important as a leader, is to have humility, be able to recognize. There's times when I know I'm just having a rough week, and I'll say to my right-hand person, like, call me out respectfully because I know I'm having a rough week. Like, COVID has knocked us down. It's not knocked us down as an organization, but as people, we've had to experience a lot and live through a lot. And I've had to say to the people closest to me in work, like, just let me know if I'm out of context at any point because I'm feeling a lot of pressure right now. So it's being able to recognize that and state it, and recognize that you yourself are human. You yourself have a lot of things going on in your personal life, as everybody does right now, as well as your work life. And if you're going to be really good, you got to have people that you're working with you, or maybe even outside of your work, who can just do that check-in with you. Like, that was a little bit abrasive. That was a little aggressive. And Kate, you're absolutely right. Just being able to say, wow, yeah, that was, I'm sorry. And thank you for telling me, right? There's a lot of humility in being able to do that. And a lot of leaders cannot do that. It's like they forget that they're human and that they too are going to make mistakes. So I agree. My experience has really had to do with negative experiences, has had to do on two extremes. And the one isn't my experience, but something that my daughter experienced in one of her first jobs, which I could not believe it happened. But for me personally, it was somebody who was a leader that made decisions based on emotions too much, emotions and favoritism, right? So connect it well with an employee, and then certain employees would get benefits or get opportunities that other people did not because they just liked them personally, right? And there was a lot of emotional decisions that were being made. The flip side is that my daughter recently, in one of her first jobs, and I won't say where it was, but it was here in Philadelphia. It was not in the Northeast, but it was in Philadelphia. Experienced the opposite, where she had a boss that didn't care about anybody as people. And it was like everybody was like a robot, you know? And so as leaders, we have to really balance between, we're not here making emotional decisions. We have to create equity and fairness, but we also have to listen. And Kate, you talked about this, especially during COVID, but in general, we have to listen to our employees really well to understand their fears, understand their stressors if we're going to be good employers. But then we also have to, on the flip side, we have to really consider then about what is fair for everybody and not become too emotionally involved in any decision that we're making, right? So there's a fine balance between maybe being overly close or emotional to folks and being overly sensitive maybe to needs, and then the other extreme, not listening at all and not understanding who people are, you know. Again, I'm only as good as my team is strong. And if they're not strong, then I'm not strong, right? You know, you're only a good leader if the people around you want to follow your leadership and are excited about the work that they're doing and feel like you care about them and feel like they have a voice, feel like they have a say in the work environment, feel like they're listened to in their stressors that are going on at home that is keeping them from being disengaged. And so my experience was really, it was very negative, and I was very young. And I didn't know what to do about it because I was in middle management and they were above me and they were going kind of over my head to allow some of my employees to do certain things and not others. And I was really struggling as the leader of that program to create some level of fairness or equity when that was being overridden. And that's the other thing. When you have middle managers, you're not overriding that middle management team. How do you empower that team, even if you disagree with them, right? There's times that you have to allow your staff to fall or to fail within reason. I was allowed to fail, right? Try new things. You may know the risks. You may know that it may or may not work. You know it's not going to make or break the organization, and it's not going to make or break a certain project, right? Of course, we have to evaluate that. But they need an opportunity to also learn and to grow from their own mistakes. And sometimes it's just a risk, and you're allowing your employee to take a risk that maybe you wouldn't have taken, but you trust them enough that they can, and they feel like they're trusted enough to not only take the risk, but maybe to fail at it, because the next time when they go to take a risk, they're going to succeed, and it's going to be stronger for everybody when they do. So I think that there's some of that is also really important that I did not experience from, you know, some of these other folks, because I was being overridden all the time as a middle manager, and almost a puppet at a really young age to what they expected or the way that they wanted it done. And that's the other thing too, that I've noticed in leadership, or that I believe in leadership, is casting the vision, but there's a lot of different ways to get to the vision. You know, you don't have to prescribe and make people do things exactly the way you want it to move the organization where you want it to go. You got to leave room for them to be flexible and be who they are and bring their talents to the table. And that's just really important, while still meeting the goals, which comes down to communication, which Kate, you've talked about, being very clear and communicating what the goals are, what the vision is, where you'd like to go. And then sometimes how you get there doesn't necessarily have to be driven by you. It can be driven by other people around you. So I agree, communication is essential to good leadership.
Absolutely, I agree too. So you've made this very easy to lead into the next question. The next question I want to talk about is your organization's culture. You as leaders, so culture in an organization or a company is from the leader, from the team, or sometimes from the industry. So this is going to be a two-part question, or maybe we just skip to the second part. Your organizations have a culture that you have developed and strengthened through the choice of your team and the direction and your mission of your organizations pre-COVID. Now we need to maintain that culture, and we maintain that vision, and we need to maintain that vision COVID. So my question is, how have you changed or evolved the culture in your organizations? And then how are you transitioning from pre-COVID to where we are now? AnnMarie, we'll start with you because you opened that door for me.
Yeah, culture. Yeah, it is a twofold question that you're asking. They're lined up together, and then there's some things that don't have to do with culture that have to just do with being a new leader under COVID, which we've had to really, really wrestle with. I know I became a different leader overnight. I think culture, CORA has always believed that we cannot, we have almost 400 employees, and we're serving over 20,000 children and their families in a given year. And our philosophy of service has always been one where it's not just what you're doing for families, but it's really how you're doing it. And in our mission and values is this idea of care and compassion. And so we have always made sure that we've been in a work environment where we're not burning out our staff, right? Because they're no good to others if we don't care about them. If we don't care about their families and their lives, how can I expect them to care about other people, right? And that culture began long before I became the CEO. But we've never believed in 60-hour work weeks. We've never believed in 55-hour work weeks or 50. And we really like to try to get people to as close to 40 to 45 hours as possible if they're salaried employees. It matters when you are working with people all the time. Mindfulness matters, and personal health and well-being has really mattered. So, when we went into COVID, we had to figure out what does it look like to care about our employees now? What does it look like to care about them while also demanding complete change, complete transformation in the way that they serve, right? We went from all in-person services to virtual within 2 weeks, and that was even after school virtual programming. And we're calling our staff to do things they've never had to do before, and their comfort zones were certainly not there to do it. And so it was walking all of them through that. But I think even more so was when we began to reopen again. And we began, like Kate mentioned, sitting down one-on-one with all our employees. Well, I can't do that with 400 employees, but we needed to gain the same perspective. We needed to figure out where are people's fears and what does it look like, again, to create equity among our team and call them all to the same thing, but to also recognize that this is scary for a lot of people. I have employees that are in their 70s, and then I have other employees that have kids that are home and they're trying to care for them and be in school with them. And we had to really walk through that well. We had to make sure we put really strong safety procedures in place. And so this year, just a couple of weeks ago, we launched a lot of our staff back into schools. And they're not a teacher in one classroom with a group of 20 kids. They're people who are going from school to school, classroom to classroom. And so before the school year even started, we had to say, what are our expectations of what each school, over 200 of them that we're going into, some are virtual, but we're in over 200 schools. What do we expect that school needs to be considering with health and safety if our staff are to return? What are we going? I couldn't wait to be told by every school what they were going to do. We had to go in knowing what our expectations were to care for our staff. And our staff needed to know that we were sending this out to the schools and saying, this is it. And they needed to know that if they ended up at a school or at another environment where they didn't feel like it was safe, that they could call us and say, this isn't a safe environment and here's why, because we already laid out our standards for them. So I think just thinking as quickly as we could through and inviting them into that process by hearing from them what their fears and their concerns were was really, 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 really important. The other thing that I just want to mention, just because I want to throw this in, and I've been wanting to throw this in this interview, is this isn't even about culture. But to be a leader in COVID, at least in my industry, right, in this field of serving people, has been like, that has made or break, that has made or broken, would have made or broken me as a leader in COVID. Because I had to take every philosophy I had of collaborative decision making, which I believe strongly in. I'm okay with making the decision, but really trying to bring partners together. Some of that had to be thrown aside in order to make it through COVID, because we had to make decisions fast. And if we didn't, we were going to lose contracts. If we didn't, we were going to lose sight of our kids, because we needed to keep services moving to the kids who really needed them. And that took fast decision making. And when I've always taken time to bring people in to the conversation so that it was also their vision, because if you get ownership of your employees, you're more likely to like have it be successful. Because I always feel like if somebody decides that it was their idea, even though I know it was mine, I've just won. That's the best thing that could ever happen. And in COVID, there have been times where I had to make fast decisions, and my team had to already trust me before COVID to know that as I was making decisions that they could wrap around it and it was going to be safe. And I think that trust has been really, really important in COVID, but it had to be there before we started. And then the team was able to wrap around it. And we've actually come out stronger financially, in terms of our contracts, in terms of our relationships with the city, in terms of our relationships with one another, I think, than when we went in. But that's only because trust was already there. That's not a culture thing as much as it is just becoming a new leader during these very different times. And I think that's going to continue. But then we transitioned really out of me having to make these decisions kind of on my own in a lot of ways and bring my organization with me, back to then handing it back to the team and handing leadership back to them. So there was like a grabbing in and then a push back. And it's been quite a challenge. And I don't think my team sees that it's happened, but I've been very aware of that new leadership that's taken place, during these last few months, which has just been mind blowing, because I would have never thought that I would have to ever be that type of leader. But in a crisis, you have to become that.
That is the greatest understatement.
Yeah.
It's been mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Kate, I'm sure you had this very similar scenario with your culture as well.
Yeah. In terms of, I feel like I've been called in the past 6 months to be a social worker, a psychologist, like a triage emergency room practitioner. And I'm not trained to be any of those things. So I have found it to be a really challenging time. What I will say about culture is, I think in the beginning years, we would always just kind of have a sniff test on culture. Someone would come in and we would meet them and be like, oh, they'd be a great fit. It was kind of just a gut thing, right? You just kind of knew. And there's something to be said for that, by the way. We kind of ran our business that way fine for a long time. And then last year, and I would highly recommend this to anyone who's never done it before, but last year we decided to really like cement our culture and go through a core values process. So we involved everybody in the company in developing those core values. And the 4 core values here are heart, hunger, excellence, and curiosity. And hunger being more of like that scrappy, Philly, gritty, underdog, Jason Kelsey type of hunger.
You don't like us, we don't care.
Yeah, exactly. They're really our core values. And I will tell you that we are serious about them. So they're not just, a mural on the wall of the office, but they're also part of the performance review. We literally measure people every single year on their demonstration or lack thereof of our core values. And it's been great. It's been one of the most transformative things that we've done for the business. I will say that, and literally, I think people think it's more of an internal thing, but it's actually not. And I'll give you an example. We're right now competing for a piece of business. And I do always put our core values now in our responses to an RFP. And because we have the expectations that our clients understand and respect our core values too. So for instance, if we have clients that don't lead with heart, which is one of our core values, leading with heart, we don't want to work with them. We just don't. We don't want to work with people who don't lead with heart and are afraid to be emotional and to be vulnerable and to have, normal emotions and not be robotic. And AnnMarie said it best. I mean, there's a lot of people who still lead that way. It's old school, but there's lots of people who still do it. So we put the core values in the RFP, and I got a call last week, and the woman's like, hey, listen, congratulations, you're going to move to the next step. And I said, oh, that's great. And she's like, and I have to be honest with you. Your work was great, but the reason we chose you was your core values. And she said, we've never seen core values written that way before. And it actually made one of the people on the review team emotional when she read them. And our CMO specifically said he's never seen core values handled that like before. Now, meanwhile, it's paragraphs. Like I wrote the paragraphs under each of them, what they mean, but they just like the way they resonated. And they run on core values too. Obviously not the same ones, but they felt like a value-driven company and another value-driven company would be a good partner. So that's literally why we're moving to the next round. Our skill set and our case studies might have looked like anybody else that we were competing against. Like, okay, they're good at what they do, but the core values are what sent us into the kind of the winner circle, which is where we are now. In terms of COVID, I would say that, yeah, I mean, I've never been more challenged as a leader. I've never thought more about retirement than I have in the past 6 months. I'm being really candid with you. It's been exhausting. And I'm like, how much longer can I do? Like, am I made for this? Like, I've definitely questioned my own self and my calling. I'm like, am I meant to do this? Am I here at the right time? I will say it's been challenging trying to figure out how to let those core values translate. So we've been trying to do things that practice those core values virtually. And it's really hard, but it could be as simple as okay, on our weekly team Zoom, we're going to focus on this core value. And we're going to have a discussion about this core value. For curiosity, I felt like we needed to flex our curiosity muscles because we're all kind of stuck in the same spot. So we did a really cool virtual scavenger hunt through a bunch of museums across the world as a creative curiosity brain teaser. So I'm not going to tell you that that it's the same, because it's not. Big part of culture is physically being together. But we're making it work, and we're exercising them and reminding ourselves of them at all times. But I think that example I gave you of just sitting down with all those employees, and I certainly would never be able to do that if I had 400, never. But that was me trying to exhibit heart and to say, okay, listen, let's have a vulnerable conversation. Like, what's going on in your life right now? How's being home? Because a lot of people, that was a fascinating exercise for me. I couldn't believe how many people were willing to be vulnerable and give it all to us. But I think that's because we're doing that in return. And I think AnnMarie said that, you have to be willing to be vulnerable and be a human being. My entire staff know that I'm finding this period to be one of the most challenging in my life as a leader. I tell them all the time. And they know that I have 3 kids that are doing learning in the room next door and really being annoying and asking for food all the time. And that it's hard for me. It's hard. I'm struggling. And they know that my husband's life has not really been changed by it. He goes to work every day. And that's been tough. There have been days he comes home and I'm like, how's life? Because mine is completely different. So I think, you share your own vulnerabilities, and you'll be amazed at the comfort level people have in sharing theirs. And I think that's a big thing that leaders are oftentimes afraid to do. They feel like they have to do the suit and tie game, right? The talking head game. And they're so afraid to admit that they're scared or that they're struggling or that, they really don't know if they're up for the task. I have found that when I admit the truth of what I'm struggling with, there have been the most fascinating times of my career in terms of the way my people respond.
Yeah. Yeah, I know one other thing Kate reminded me, I went right away to weekly updates, and I did videos every week. And then we opened up what we call state of the agency meetings, where it was just you've heard the updates. I mean, we at one point thought we were going to lose millions of dollars, and people thought their jobs were on the line, right? And so I was being really honest with everything we were applying for, all the risks that we were at, who we were talking to, where we were at each step of the way. At one point I was saying, so for another week, your jobs are so secure. I'm going to talk to you again next week. I mean, it was like week after week after week, and being really honest. And then we opened up, actually a CEO comment suggestion box throughout the whole thing that was anonymous. So we set it up so that we wouldn't know if they didn't want to put their name in, ask questions or make comments that would go out to the whole organization. And I made a commitment to do that. So we really tried to create spaces for people to hear directly from me. And all the research during COVID has indicated people want to hear from the top. It's no longer middle managers. They want to know, they not only want to know what you're doing and that you're present and engaged, but when the rioting started happening here in Philadelphia, well, across the nation, and people were really scared, they also wanted to know where you stood. What are your beliefs? Who are you? Can I trust you? And so the weight of that has been really lofty during this time. And we went from people were praising leadership. And then when all that began to happen, and is still, really involved now, we started having people be very reactionary in negative ways. And then we actually had to bring, really support our employees on that layer too, in a different type of way. So it has been, it has been painful, invigorating, life-giving, stressful. And yes, to Kate's point, there are days where I woke up, and I even told my staff this, I don't know that I'm the right person for the job. Up until now, I could carry this, but I'm not sure now, and I said that at one point to my leadership team, not necessarily to the whole organization, but the 11 people that I work closest with. And we just had to talk through that. We had to be really honest, and, nobody has all the resources, and we all have to carry one another through this. So it has been a challenge, and in some ways it's brought out the best in us and exposed the worst in us that we can only grow from. And I think that's, Kate said this before, but there's opportunity here. There's always opportunity to learn from what we do well, what we don't do well, what's happening in the world around us. It always provides us with an opportunity. So what are we going to do with that? Whether it's a negative opportunity or positive, what are we going to do with that? And we always have an opportunity to do something with it.
All very excellent points. And every industry can really can relate to a lot of what you're saying. But your nonprofit, communications, industry, manufacturing, it's all across the board. So we've all touched, as women, we've all touched about our family, and as women, we are wired to multitask and to take on many different roles, volunteering, obviously our profession, our family, what have you. But I'm going to ask you, what role did your family play, or does your family play into your leadership? Because we all have, especially now, AnnMarie, you and I spoke about this last week. I will say full disclosure for those of you who are watching. I said, thank goodness my children are empty. I'm an empty nester. They're out of the house. It would have been the biggest disaster in the world if I had to home educate my children. So I'm very fortunate. But how have your families played a role in your leadership growth? AnnMarie, we'll start with you.
Sure. That's a great question. Man, humility. There are days when I'm like, how at work does everybody listen to me? And I come home and nobody wants to hear a single thing I do. And they don't, I've got 3 teenagers and I've got a 9-year-old and they just don't listen to me, I'm used to people kind of listening, right? So they actually help to keep me really humble in a really great way, and then I think just learning, now that my children are a little bit older, but even my youngest one, you know them so well, your family so well, and they all have very different strengths. And so to see them operating in their strengths, I think helps you to appreciate how different people are and how communication is very different based on who you're talking to, how it's received and how it's heard. You can have a child who thinks you're the most critical person in the world, and the other child who thinks that you're just giving really constructive criticism, and they're thrilled to have it in the same home with the same parent, And I think it just teaches me so much just about people, so between being a mom and having that level of humility, and also just getting to know people as individuals so well in your home, I think is just, especially as they get older and you get to experience them growing up. But the other thing is I think just a lot of compassion for people who are balancing a lot between work and home. You really know how it can be done, but you also know that it's hard, and it allows me to have compassion on my employees in a very positive way. I can still stretch them and I can still grow them, but I can also appreciate that if we're going to be good employees, we have to care about home and work, and we have to see all of our employees as, balancing these many roles. And in COVID, it's even more so. We're all trying to balance so much. Our kids are at home, doing virtual education. For 2 weeks, I was quarantined, and I was sitting there with board meetings. I had board meetings at the same time I'm being quarantined with my 9-year-old who's now doing virtual education. Well, he can't sit through 6 hours, right? And so I just kept telling my team every day, every morning when I was being interrupted during my team meetings, because we have department team meetings every single day. I just said to them, I think that this was supposed to happen right now so that I would have a lot of compassion for my employees who are going through the same thing. And so I became grateful for the fact that I had this experience. But I think the biggest thing is just humility. Man, you can be a CEO and people can listen to you, and they will listen to you. They may not like you, but they'll listen to you. Well, your kids, as they became teenagers, they may not listen to you at all. And they may not like you either for a little while, Yeah. So I think that working within that has taught me a whole lot, especially as they get older. Definitely.
Yeah, for me, it's been a lot. It's been that longevity and sometimes that fuel that I need. So I think people always say this, that it can get lonely at the top. That's really, really true. And by no means do I mean that as like a pity party, because that's not what I mean at all. It's just sometimes you feel like you might be isolated and have that one big decision, and you can ask for as much collaboration as you want, but really the buck stops with you. So that's, and that's the privilege of being the leader, right? That the buck stops with you. I always say it's a privilege and it's a struggle at the same time. But for me, I think especially over the past 6 months, there have been those times that we just described of thinking like, am I up for this? This might be too big. This might be bigger than I can handle. And every once in a while, through complaining that I'm taking them off TikTok or that I wanted them to empty the dishwasher, I get those glimmers of, well, you're a really good role model, Mom, and you work really hard, Mom. And, oh, Mom, I saw that you helped with that thing. That was really good. To just that reminder that they're watching and that they see you providing that example. That's all I need. Like that's a good full tank of gas for the next week. And I think in this particular situation that we're in, this is a day by day, week by week thing. It really is. I mean, there are weeks where I'm like, this is just the pits. And there are weeks that I'm like, okay, guess what? The reason why we're in so much discomfort is because we're going to be growing like crazy. And we're going to look back on this time as a time of great enlightenment. And I still do believe that, by the way. I do think that we're going to look back on this time as a time of great enlightenment for all the reasons AnnMarie just said. I was the biggest, even though I wanted to be a work from home person, I was the biggest naysayer on it. And part of that was my own peer group, my own friends who were working from home and like never seemed to be working. So when I would try to, implement it here, I'd be like, are people really going to get their stuff done? And I've learned that it might not be conventional hours for the reasons AnnMarie just said. I have young moms that work for me who just physically cannot do it. They cannot do it at certain periods of the day. So they might be catching up at night or burning the midnight oil or doing what they need to do to make it work. But this is teaching us that it can work. And the other thing it's teaching us is that, that time where we used to cringe when like the dog would bark on a conference call or a child would interrupt a conference call. I remember being on calls and hearing that happening to someone and cringing. And now it's like, oh, hi, or oh, that's my dog. It's just made us kinder, more authentic human beings, right? I've been on calls with like serious CEOs of serious companies in this region. And they're like, oh, sorry, that's the dog, or sorry, UPS just stopped by. And isn't that a wonderful thing that we can just be people? It's like what I said at the beginning about celebrities are just people. we're just people. So I think for me, it's been that my kids have provided me that occasional boost I need to keep going. Because really, that's what your legacy is. That's what it's all about. None of this is going to be here. None of this really matters for me. You have to focus on the end game. And the end game is for those kids to say, I had a great mom and she inspired me to be XYZ in my life. And to maybe one day be on a Zoom where they say, my mom was my mentor. That would be a great thing.
That would be a great thing. I can tell you, my children are older, so my daughter's 28, my son's 26, and I watch it in my daughter, and she'll say to me, Mom, this is your fault. I said, what's my fault? She said, I turned into you, which I think is the best. And she will occasionally say that she apologizes and she knew I was right, but I think that's only happened 4 times, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But
I know. Recently, I had my 17-year-old say she was like, yeah, I volunteer as Students Run Philly Style with my son and my daughter. I have 4 kids, but with my middle 2, and they were asked to just share who their mentor was, and she said me. How could it? She said me, and she's like, but how could it not be? She's like, she spends time with us. She raises us. She's got food on the table every day. She's a CEO of a company that's serving so many thousands of kids every year. She's like, how could it not be my mom? It was the first time I ever heard that come out of the mouth. And I was just like, that's it. That's what matters.
That's what you're doing it for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And they're the next generation of leaders. They're the emerging leaders that we are setting examples for that are going to make a real difference in the world. And being in this virtual world, it was difficult for us to pivot, but for them, in a lot of cases, it's so much easier, and their world hopefully will be a little easier. So I want one last question, because we always have to live with the advice, leave the Zoom with the advice. So what would be one golden nugget that you would like to share, that you would like people who are viewing this session to be able to turn around and start figuring out how they can roll this into their life, their personal life with their family, their career, their personal development? What would you like to share and send people off to as an action plan? Kate? Mm-hmm. We'll start with you.
I think I said it already, but I'm going to emphasize it. Lead with heart. Always lead with heart. And I think especially in this time, and it's not even necessarily COVID, I think it's more for me right now about this time in our country, the conversations we're having about race and about equity. And we've been having these conversations about gender equity forever. It's a real shame that in 2020, there's still a whole bunch of people who feel like they can't come to their workplace or they can't come to even a dinner party and be their authentic selves, just be who they are. And just like, I try to say to myself, imagine that, because I definitely come as my authentic self everywhere I am. I think that's partly my age and partly that I've had this opportunity to be in a leadership position. It definitely came with age, though, the comfort to just be who I am. It's just such a horrible thing to think that you could show up at work every day and not feel free to be who you are. And I think a great deal of that comes from the top. If the culture isn't set to be warm, inviting, inclusive, friendly, and there's not people leading with heart, then you're not going to feel that way. So I would challenge anyone on this call, whether they're just in that beginning entry level job that might get them a leadership job one day, or if they're middle manager who's definitely on the promotion track, or they're a leader, try to wear that heart on your sleeve and lead with heart and let people be who they are in your presence. I'm not saying that it's an intimidation thing, because I truly believe that there's part of that we allow ourselves to be intimidated, but there's definitely a power and control thing that still happens in boardrooms today. So really just be authentic, lead with heart, and let people be who they are, because when you let people be who they are, your whole team's only going to get better. Innovative ideas don't come from the same minds. They come from great different minds, people who don't have the same experience as you, people who don't live the same experience as you. So whether it's diversity of race, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, religious background, the better blended the pot, the better we are. And I just think that in the center of that is just leading with your heart and being an authentic human.
Great advice. AnnMarie.
Yeah, I could say everything Kate just said because I totally agree with it. But I'll choose to say something different. I think, as a leader, it is not about you, right? At all. It is fully about engaging and supporting and pulling the best out of other people, right? And in order to do that, it means that you have to get to know them as human beings. It means that you have to recognize your own weaknesses. It means you have to never feel a power struggle if you go into a meeting and one of your team is far, far above you in skill set in a certain area, right? It means that you celebrate that and you pull that out of people and you empower them to be great, right? And I think that way too many leaders they're in it for power, or they become powerful and then they lose sight of that and it becomes about them. And it's not, that company, if you do your job right, the company is gonna live way beyond you, and what are you going to do to create, Kate talked about legacy with your home, but create the legacy that they may never remember your name in 50 years, but still exists because you built the foundation that was necessary for it to go on forever, And I think that is so important as a leader, to just feel that. And Kate mentioned something else. This isn't to leaders as much as it is to maybe somebody who would be listening to this who is new in their field and wants to be a leader and aspires to be a leader someday, which I actually never aspired to be. I think that just happened. Kate has said this over and over and over again, and I just want to repeat it. It is take the entry-level job. Be great. And don't wait for somebody to promote you. When you see a challenge, take it by the reins. Come in with new ideas. Never go to a boss and say, this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working, without also saying, and here's some of my great thoughts on how I would love to see this change, right? And so for those maybe younger folks out there who are listening to this, that's how you grow in leadership, is by just taking the job that you get, see it as a learning opportunity, and being innovative and creative and problem solving as you see things that need to be changed. I think that that's so important. So my takeaway, it's not about you. It's about the mission of the company. It's about moving forward and serving people, whether you're in marketing or whether you're, direct service and counseling services, behavioral health. It's not about you. It's about the people that you're serving and the people that you work with.
Very, very sound advice. Kate, AnnMarie, you're on this session for a reason. And you've just proven to everybody why you are successful leaders in your fields and why you do such a great job and you have such powerful teams behind you. And we really appreciate your time today, and we really appreciate your value and your leadership and your real education for the rest of us to be able to map it out for us to follow. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate your participation and much success. We'll need to do a wrap up after this COVID is over to see where our organizations fall after that. So we'll have to do a part 2 for this.
Sounds great.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. I would like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors. Through their support, we are able to bring you quality programming and a virtual networking experience. I'd like to thank our corporate sponsors, Philadelphia Federal Credit Union, Parks Casino, TD Bank, Marshall's Distribution Center, Philadelphia. I'd like to thank our executive sponsors, CORA Services, Holy Family University, Inverse Paradox, Jefferson Health Northeast, Nazareth Hospital, Northeast Family YMCA, PICO, Philadelphia Gas Works, Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, Rivers Casino, St. Basil Academy, and Witham Smith & Brown. I'd also like to thank our media sponsor, Northeast Times, Our production sponsor, Viral Ideas Marketing, and our session sponsors, Fast Signs of Northeast Philadelphia. Please take a moment to reach out to our sponsors and share your positive experience as a subscriber of the 2020 Women in Business Conference. Thank you very much for subscribing, and we hope you enjoy our programming.